Good evening. My name is Reverend Andrea Johnson, and on behalf of this place, Winnetka Covenant Church, I'd like to welcome you and open us with prayer. Great source of all our life, who are our mother and father to all of us, look upon your planet Earth divided. Help us to know that we are all your children, that all nations belong to one great family, that all religions seek to draw us to you. Multiply our prayers in every land until the whole earth becomes your congregation, united in your love. Sustain our vision of a peaceful future and give us strength to work unceasingly to make that vision real. Be at work among us tonight as we gather as brothers and sisters to consider the status of women in our world and what our sacred texts teach us. We thank you for our moderator and panel participants, for their willingness to share their gifts of knowledge and insight as we explore together. The blessing of God, the eternal goodwill of God, the shalom of God, the wildness and the warmth of God be among us and between us, now and always. Amen.
Good evening. My name is Dale Naz-Warich, and I'm the Vice President of the MultifaithAlliance. Let me begin with the interfaith greetings of welcome, peace, shalom, Allahu Abba, and Assalamu Alaikum. From all of our 15 congregational members, we want to say thank you for taking time out of your snowy winter Thursday evening. A very gracious thank you to Denise Johnson and the Winnetka Covenant Church for allowing us this sacred space, and especially to Reverend Andrea Johnson for welcoming us. As our political climate changes, we need to be aware of our widowed surroundings. As a faith-based organization, the MultifaithAlliance is horrified with the rise of the hate crimes and various acts of harassment that have arisen, particularly to those that are perceived as immigrants or not American, against blacks, against Muslims, against Jews, against women, and other marginalized communities. What's more, an unsettling divisiveness has left many Americans and many people around the world feeling on edge, uncertain of the future and unsure of how to relate to each other as fellow citizens or citizens of the world. As a faith-based organization, we strive for justice and love for all. We strive to embody solidarity with our sisters and brothers of every race, creed, ethnicity, and orientation. We hope that this evening brings solidarity to everyone here. Now for the name change. The purpose of the MultifaithAlliance, formerly known as the Winnetka Interfaith Council, is to foster interfaith understanding by providing a forum for interfaith dialogue and developing programs that provide a service to the community at large, where there is mutual respect for different faith traditions. In the past 50 years, the Winnetka Interfaith Council has been around. It has experienced much growth and change. For the past year, numerous of members of ours have been discussing a name change. So tonight I will give you a summary of why the Winnetka Interfaith Council is now the MultifaithAlliance. First is a location. New Trier, by definition, includes the communities of Winnetka, Kenilworth, Glencoe, Northfield, and Wilmette. And these communities more accurately represent most of our faith communities, or at least one member in the faith community. Number two, the purpose. Multi-faith is appeared more frequently in contemporary usage to refer to groups that go beyond interfaith. The word promotes dialogue, tolerance, and acceptance with the foundation of understanding and cooperation. Organizational change. By definition, council describes a body gathered to consult, deliberate, and set policy. Alliance refers to an organization that more actively works to multiply the resources and talents of respective member organizations for the better of the whole. One of the benefits of this group is the opportunity to engage in conversation on varied topics with individuals who have different perspectives. There have been 2 forums sponsored by the Alliance thus far. Finding Inner Peace, What Do the Sacred Texts Teach? In a World of Misunderstanding, What Do the Sacred Texts Teach? And tonight being our 3rd forum, The Status of Women, Have We Come Far Enough? What do the sacred texts teach? Our panel will begin with our esteemed moderator, Dr. Tom Makaitis, Professor of History at DePaul University. I will leave it up to our moderator to introduce each one of our speakers, as well as to give the logistics of tonight. No questions will be asked from the floor. You have received an index card. Please write your questions in the index card and just wave them towards the end, and someone will come by and pick up those index cards. If you want to learn more about the New Trier Multi-Faith Alliance, please visit the website, ntmalliance.org. The next event at the Winnetka Covenant Church by the New Trier Multi-Faith Alliance will be on Tuesday, November 22nd for the Interfaith Thanksgiving service. Lastly, I'd like to thank Dr. Jenna Kodadad, our co-chair, for the Interfaith Understanding team that put this entire evening together, our president, Dr. Mitch Slotnick, and Mary Johnson, along with numerous members that have put this evening together. Also, Dr. Thomas Murphy and Waldig Zawalski, who coordinated the book that you're looking at currently. If they could all just stand to be recognized, I'd really appreciate that. It took a lot of time and effort for these individuals. Thank you once again for your time and commitment to empowering our community. If you have questions afterwards, any of the individuals that stood up, please feel free to join us at the hospitality and ask us questions. And now I will pass it on to Dr. Makaitis.
Thank you very much. And before I commence my opening remarks, I was handed a note saying that whoever has the gray-white Toyota RAV4, your lights are on. I hope every question is that easy. Anyway, I'll keep my remarks extremely brief as we want to hear from these wonderful panelists we have. As I looked at the title of tonight's program, Have We Come Far Enough? I think maybe a year ago that question would have seemed rhetorical. Perhaps for some of us now there's an irony to it, because we see that among the many ways we are so divided in this country, unfortunately, gender continues to be an issue. We've certainly made progress. How much within our faith traditions will be the subject of our discussion. But on the positive side of things, I think it's absolutely wonderful that we gather like this, because I truly believe in this divided and fractious America, that faith communities are one of the few places where people can gather in an atmosphere of love, respect, and mutual trust to discuss challenging issues. And that's what we're going to do. So with no further ado, moving from my left to my right, their bios are in here. I don't want to read them to you. Also are the texts that they've selected from their sacred texts. I commend those to you. They're quite excellent reads. To my immediate left, Ms. Valerie Donna of the Baha'i Faith. Next to her, Ms. Hind Maki. Next to her, Reverend Heath Howe. And next to her, Rabbi Emily Siegel. And so without further ado, Ms. Donna, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Alawapa. That is a Baha'i greeting, meaning God is most glorious. And how appropriate in His sanctuary that we would sing praises to God. You know, the central pivot around which all of the Baha'i teachings revolve is the oneness of humanity. And the Baha'is' teachings say that this oneness of humanity is essential to the spiritual progress, the peace and well-being of humanity. and that to achieve that oneness of humanity, all of the aspects of humanity must be in a state of equality. They must be in a state where where humanity, if you analogize it to the human body, all of the parts are functioning. So in the Baha'i teachings, throughout all of the teachings of the Baha'i faith, there is a spiritual imperative that the importance of human advancement must be tied to the equality and advancement of women. It is very specific in the scriptures and the holy writings of the Baha'i teachings, and that this spiritual imperative must be put into practice if humanity is to advance to the stage of oneness and unity, which is essential to its well-being. That it cannot achieve this oneness when one aspect of humanity is in a period of oppression, of being denied basic rights. The advancement of women, as I said, it's a fundamental truth. One of the ways that one thing that is important in our teaching is that humanity must understand what it means to be human. And what is that reality? What is the essential qualities of being human? And in looking at that, we recognize that being human has two dimensions, the material dimension and the spiritual dimension. And in that spiritual dimension, there is no identity of gender. That spiritual dimension, which we refer to as the soul, that this has no distinction as to race, as to nationality, color, or gender. Therefore, there is that oneness within that spiritual element, that essence of who we are. It is the material essence, the physical, that has made these distinctions. But within the spiritual essence, there is no distinction. And because there is no distinction, no one group should exalt itself over another. And when we begin to understand the spiritual essence of who we are, we will begin to put into practice those behaviors that in essence help to elevate the status of all in society, most particularly women. So it requires us to really expand the basis of human identity. What does it mean to be human? In the process of building civilizations, we Baha'is believe that this is critical and important for us to know and to understand so that we can begin to see in our fellow human beings that essence, that soul, that all of the attributes of our Creator without reference to the outward form. And that with respect to women, we have to understand that women are partners in the development of humanity. They are not in any way inferior partners, but they are equal partners. So in looking at what it is, expanding our concept of human identity, we have to realize that how we have defined ourselves as humans really is not the way that God intended for us to define ourselves. We as Baha'is believe that it is important that we develop that spiritual character and that the physical is really there for us to achieve those advance our material capacities here in this earthly existence. But our primary purpose is to know God and to love God and to become closer to God. One of the explicit statements from the Baha'i faith is, "Know ye not why we created you all from the same dust, that no one should exalt himself over the other? Ponder at all times in your hearts how you were created. Since we have created you all from the same substance, it is incumbent upon you to be as one soul, even as one soul." So for us as Baha'is, this is very important if we are to build the civilizations in which the spiritual nature of human beings becomes a very dominant characteristic. Now, in understanding then what it means to be human, one of the things that we have in the writings often is the analogy of the human body. And so when we talk about the human identity, we use the analogy often of the human body, that the human body cannot function if one part is not functioning properly. So with respect to women, if women are not given their full opportunities to grow, to develop, then it would be impossible for humanity to grow and develop. That the lack of advancement for women hinders all of society. It does not hinder just one aspect of society. So this is important to us in determining how we are to develop as human beings. One of the things we often come hear is, well, culture is important. We must be mindful of culture. And we as Baha'is believe in unity and diversity. We believe that it is important that culture be emphasized and celebrated. At the same time, we believe that if we are to achieve the purpose for which God has put us here, there is no culture that can take away the preciousness of humanity. There is no culture that can take away or oppress any particular one of God's creatures. That we have to be very mindful when we talk about respect of culture to understand that God gave no preference in any culture that anyone would be treated in a manner that was inferior or that would be repressive to any of his creatures. And we understand, though, to achieve this understanding, to get all of us to understand that our identity as human beings really has to turn to how we see ourselves as God's creatures. To get to that, we understand that it will take time. It's not like, poof, tomorrow we're going to have that. But what we think it does entail is the beginning to transform our thought process, a beginning to look at things from a very different perspective, to begin to see what are the questions that we should be asking. What should we be looking at in order to make sure that that segment of society, those who are women, are advanced? What should we be asking? We believe that women are the first teachers of the children. Therefore, because women are the first teachers of the children, priority should be given to educating girls. We believe that when mothers are given the opportunity themselves to be educated, they will educate their children, and we believe it will have a profound impact on society as a whole. But how do we begin to transform those thoughts? How do we begin to see that? We believe it is important to start asking the questions early on, asking the questions in our communities, and begin to ask why. Why is it important? What is it that women bring that will contribute to the betterment of society? What is it that women bring that helps the equality of men? You know, one of the biggest misconceptions that we have when we talk about the advancement of women is that it means that men are equal. The fact is, when women are suppressed, men are also being suppressed because there's no opportunity for either one to realize their full spiritual potential. But we live in a society in which we have developed language and have defined our identity from the physical, from the material, and so men and in certain cultures, women have been perceived in certain ways, even in what we consider our advanced culture. So we have to begin that process of transforming our thoughts. In transforming our thoughts, we find it's necessary to redefine what we mean by things such as power. Historically, we have viewed power as in a material sense. So we have to really look at how we see these things. How do we see power? Does it mean the capacity for love, kindness, humility, integrity? Does that not bring power to us? There were many writings in the Baha'i faith on the advancement of women, on the equality of women and men, and it would take a long time to discuss all of them with you. But as you have been told, it's been advised, each of us is given a particular period of time, and you don't want to hear me all evening. So thank you.
Okay, Ms. Maki?
Sure, thank you so much. I could listen to you all day because I'm very fascinated by the similarities, which I think you will notice yourselves, and also some of the differences as well. And I wanted to just thank the Winnetka Multi-Faith Council and the New Trier Multi-Faith Council and the Winnetka Covenant Church for the invitation. It was a beautiful drive over here all the way from Orland Park. Yeah. So I'm very thrilled to be here, and when I was invited to share a couple of texts for this group, I at first wanted to be innovative and share something that was more obscure, around women and women's rights and girls' rights, just because I wanted to also challenge myself. And then I thought, you know what, let me just go to the old and solid and really kind of in core values of the Holy Quran. And before I share them with you, and they are in your booklet, I wanted to just say one word about the Holy Quran. According to Muslims, we believe that it is the revealed word of God that was not changed by time or by place or by human intervention. And so there are English translations, multilingual translations of the Quran, but that's just a translation and also an interpretation. And the actual Quran is in Arabic, and I would actually like to share these verses with you in Arabic, because I believe you will see sort of the balance that I believe, and not only myself, but most scholars of Islam believe that one of the core principles of the Holy Quran is the notion of human equality before God, spiritually, and really spiritually is the most important part. And I'll share a few thoughts in a minute. So I wanted to share with you the first verse, and I won't sing it, but I will recite it. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. إن المسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات والقانتين والقانتات والصادقين والصادقات والصابرين والصابرات والخاشعين والخاشعات والمتصدقين والمتصدقات والصائمين والصائمات والحافظين لفروجهم والحافظات والذاكرين الله كثيرا والذاكرات أعد الله لهم مغفرة وأجرا عظيما. And so again, this is that first verse that in English is from the Federated Clans, indeed the Muslim men and the Muslim women and the believing men and the believing women, and it goes on that way until the last part of that verse, which says that these men and women God has prepared for them forgiveness and a magnificent reward. Now, you hear the balance in Arabic. You hear al-mu'mineen wal-mu'minat, and that goes on men and women. And it's a very specific understanding, because throughout most of the rest of the Quran, when humanity is addressed, Arabic is a gendered language, and the male gender, the sort of male nouns and male verbs are supposed to mean for everyone. It's supposed to include all genders. And so, but if there's just a female, like that at ending, that is for only women and girls, right? And so the fact that this is actually a really unique verse in the Quran, because it specifically highlights believing men and believing women in this way. So again, this is actually a verse where the scholars definitely point to and say that the Quran is undergirded by this idea of spiritual equality before God, and not only spiritual equality, but a duty to one another as spiritual beings, of men and women and of people of different genders. And so Muslims understand and teach and believe that all human beings have the same opportunities to realize their moral and their spiritual potential. Unfortunately, we know that we live in a world of iniquities, right, of inequality, where there are systemic barriers that stop people of different backgrounds, different genders, different races, different social backgrounds from actually living out their full potential. And in Islam, we believe that that is actually a spiritual violation, that all human beings were born in dignity and created in dignity, and all human beings have that right to fulfill their spiritual potential. That is really critical because, as I mentioned, these distinctions that human beings give to one another in terms of race and gender are actually meaningless to God, right? And therefore they should be meaningless to us. That spiritual worth is the important worth of a human being. There is a clear spiritual equality and duty of men and women to God, and that is prayer, that is service, that is fasting, offering the charity, going to the pilgrimage. And these duties, if you will, are often still erased by the patriarchy. And so you will perhaps come across teachings sometimes where women who are menstruating, for example, do not participate in prayers all the time, do not participate in the Ramadan fasts. And while many Muslim feminists view this, in fact, as a mercy and as an acknowledgement of women's biologies, some in the patriarchy, male or female, will refer to this as, in fact, a deficiency in women, where this has never been, this is not the case in the Holy Quran, but this is an interpretation. And this often goes even further when women and girls who are victims of domestic violence, for example, are told, well, you are a weak person, right? And so there is this very deliberate erasure and ignoring of the equality, the spiritual equality that is very clearly stated in the Holy Quran, not only in this particular verse that I mentioned, but throughout the entire Quran. And I wanted to maybe speak a little bit to the second verse that I have shared here with you, and I think this is really critical, and I'll just read it in English. It's not as rhythmic in Arabic, but it's, as for the believing men and women, all of them are allies of one another. They enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong. Moreover, they duly establish the prayer and give zakat charity, and they obey God and His messenger. It is these upon whom God shall have mercy. Indeed, God is overpowering, all-wise. So again, we have a really interesting kind of flip of gender roles, where in many parts of not only the Muslim world, but just in many parts of the world, there's this idea that men and women necessarily must clash with each other, this idea that rights and privileges around the world are in fact a zero-sum game. When in the Quranic understanding of human society, that rights and privileges are something that both men and women must work together to ensure that all people have, right? So today we talk about male allies, we talk about, men and boys stepping up to speak out against sexual harassment in the workplace or in school, for example. This is not a new construct for Muslims, but it is often a forgotten construct for Muslims, right? Where even though the Holy Quran is very specific about this, and I wanted to share just one last point about these particular verses. Many of you in this room who are familiar with Quranic exegesis will know that you cannot interpret a verse in the Quran without looking at the context. And this particular context of the chapter 9, verse 71, actually occurred when the Muslim community was under military strikes. It was during a time when there was a war between Muslims and non-Muslims. So what does that tell us today? That even in the most trying of times, even when your community is literally, physically, and militarily under attack, people's rights, and especially women's rights, cannot be sacrificed, right? And so today I often hear that we're living in a time of Islamophobia, that bringing up issues of sexual violence by clergy, for example, of domestic violence, of, even something that you might think is less important, like who gets to speak for Muslims and Islam in the media, something which is dear to my heart, which is who has access to religious and sacred space, who has access to education, Quranic education and otherwise, that bringing up these deficiencies that we see in the modern world right now when we're living in a time of Islamophobia, when I think it's very clear that the Muslim community, among others, is under attack by our government, that we should hide that and not speak on it. Whereas in the Holy Quran, these verses do tell us that even when your community is under military attack, that you should still do your best to uphold justice and to forbid evil as men and women and to be allies for one another. And as my Baha'i colleague said, there's so much more to discuss, but I'm eager to hear more from my Jewish and Christian sisters and then discuss with you as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Reverend Howe?
Good evening. Thank you for coming and being with us. It's wonderful to be a part of this panel with these beautiful women. When I told I have the privilege of living with teenagers right now, and I live in Evanston, and I have a budding feminist as a 17-year-old daughter, and I told her what I had been invited to do and told her the question, the status of women, have we come far enough? And she, in her very confident 17-year-old behavior, said, "Oh, well, that's easy. Just say no and sit down." Then as I unpacked that a little bit with her again, she said, "Well, maybe you could wear a pink hat with a cross on it." And by pink hat, you know what I'm talking about. And I thought about that. And I thought about a very simple answer, no. And then I remembered that I have met a man named Jesus who told me everything I'd ever done. And I thought, I can't just say no to this. And so as I began to think about that, I thought, well, what is it about him and about this faith that I was born into and have at times thought maybe I should leave, but really can't. And I thought, what is it about this that makes this answer no and yes? And part of it, I think, is that for Christians, and if there were another Christian woman up here tonight, she might relate to our sacred text in a different way than I am, even if she might have the same answer. But I think that I think we could all agree as Christians that what we bring to an interfaith conversation is that in Jesus, in Christ, God has been incarnate in the world, and then his life shows us that a way to a holy sacredness of enough is through what we would call the Paschal mystery, the dying to an old way of life and arising to a new one. The status of women, have we come far enough? And I just kept hanging on that word enough. And having worked with spiritual directors for most of my life, I kept thinking there is something very holy and complete about enough. And there is a way to that. So I agree with my daughter, no. And I know that there is a way there. And the sacred text that I chose to consider with you tonight, I think tell a story, at least the first one, about a woman who's experienced this. I want to point out that if I'm right about this, in the Christian scriptures anyway, who Jesus is revealed to women first. His mom was his first to know about him. And then there are other women that he meets throughout his journey that who he is as fully human and fully divine is realized by these women. And even the people that go to the tomb that find him there are the women. And they're the ones that tell their brothers, come and see, come and see. But the story that I love the most of the women in the Christian texts is the story that I call the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman that Jesus meets. And full disclosure, I completely identify with her and think that she was me before I came. And in the movie that I make of the Bible, when I picture these stories, like Grace Kelly or Susan Sarandon or somebody like that plays her, right? And because I think she's so beautiful. And I think at the beginning, she's completely flirting with Jesus. And I love the idea of his humanness and his divinity being present as she's trying to engage with him. She's a foreigner. She's someone he should not engage with. Not only is he not a Jewish man, but she's a woman. And yet he does. The status of women, have we come far enough? No, except there is a man that I have met. And he breaks all these rules. And so he talks with a Samaritan, and he speaks with a woman. And as she's bantering with him, the way that I read it, he doesn't play along with her. He wants to go deeper. It's more than just a male-female flirtation here. And so then she kind of sees that she's called out on that. And so she begins, oh, I see that you are a prophet. And so she begins to engage with him intellectually. And yet he calls her on that. And he begins to just really speak with her, equal to equal. And in that moment, in that conversation, it's as if the onion layer of who she is has been peeled off, and she's now just heart to heart, soul to soul, vulnerable person to vulnerable person, and she sees all of his divinity, and then he shows her all of hers. And she can't be who she is anymore. She's completely changed. She's swept into all of who he is and sees that at her core, she is divine too. And then what does she do? Well, I would love to say that she snuggles up with him and that's it. Because if I'm really honest, in my life, it would be a lot more simple and a lot easier if Jesus and I could just snuggle up and just be the two of us. But it's not like that, because he enjoys a messiness of a human relationship. Part of what else the Christian tradition brings us is that powerful Godhead that has so much energy contained in it that it is Trinitarian in how we understand it. And so she leaves this conversation where Jesus has been vulnerable and open to her and called her forth into her holiness, and she goes. And she meets other people, and she brings them in. And I love the fact that a woman may have been the first evangelist. But you know what's great about this story is that when she goes back to her community, I love that the gospel writer of John says she leaves her water jug at the well. She doesn't even need it. She's so full, and there's so much enoughness in her that she goes to the people she knows, and they believe her. They believe her. Something is different about her. They must have known that she's this woman with this sordid past, but something's different about her now. And they believe her, and they want to come and see too. And some of those people were men. And I agree with what has been said here so far, that The status of women, have we come far enough? No, and neither have our brothers. Until we begin to understand this holiness of enough, of completion, of us together as one body. And it requires, we would say, based on our Christian texts, a dying to an old way of living, of looking at the world in a dualistic way, in a way of sorting who's right and who's wrong, who's dominating, who's not, and bringing everybody together. The second text that I chose for you to consider is from the book of Revelation. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. It seems to me, have we come far enough, is about a journey that begins and ends, we would say, with Christ, with God at the center. Thank you.
Rabbi Siegel?
I want to begin with gratitude. You'll have to pardon my voice. I was joking with my husband today that if I have absolutely no voice, I would just say it's a symbol of the silencing of women through the centuries or something like that. But I'm going to do my best, and you'll forgive my lack of voice today. So I want to begin with gratitude to the New Trier Multi-Faith Alliance for fostering this conversation, and to Winnetka Covenant Church for hosting, and my fellow panelists and our moderator. I love the opportunity to go last in one of these groups. Often the Jewish faith, because it's the most ancient, often goes first, and I don't get to listen before I speak, so it's a treat to close us out before questions and everything. I was very much, I think, as all of us seem to have been, I was struck by the title, and some of my female colleagues suggested to me, similarly to, I think, what your 17-year-old daughter did, just if there was a microphone to drop, just say no and mic drop. That no, we haven't come far enough. That in this particular case, the very question, the status of women, have we come far enough? The question really is its own answer. If we have a need for this conversation, we haven't, right? And it's true in society, it's true in religion, because religion lives in society, and society lives in religion. That religion influences society and is a product of society through the ages, right? What would be enough for women to have come far enough? What is enough? What does that look like? Maybe it looks like not having a need for this conversation. I was reminded of when Ruth Bader Ginsburg was asked how many women would be enough to have on the Supreme Court, and she said, 9, right? You know, I wondered to myself, would we ever have a discussion, men in religion, the status of men in religion, have we come far enough? Who would populate that panel and moderate it, right? So I don't mean to be flip, but I think that I react almost viscerally to this kind of question with a no. And I think it's okay to sit with that. But I think similarly to what you were saying, there is a path to enough. Though we are, and I think that's such an important thing to hold on to in our political state and the way things are, that just because things aren't yet there, it doesn't mean there isn't a path. We're not stuck here, right? Now, Judaism, part of the beauty is how ancient our origin is in Judaism, in Israelite religion. You know, Judaism today isn't what the Israelites practice, right? But part of the beauty is in how ancient it is, but that's also part of what breeds challenge within Judaism, because we're a law-based religion. At least many of the sects or the streams of Judaism are quite law-based. Reform Judaism, of which I'm a part, is the most progressive, and we rely less on law. We say it has a vote but not a veto in how we practice, right? And there are times when we look at what in Reformed Judaism we now know to be our highest values, what we've come to understand as our highest values, and sometimes that supersedes what we previously believed to be law. And in some cases regarding the status of women, we say, okay, there are texts from the rabbis that are considered law by the other movements, such as that women are not bound to fulfill time-bound commandments. Men are supposed to pray 3 times a day, but women, with responsibilities in the home and caring for children, is it a gift to women? Is it a releasing them to say that they're not bound to pray 3 times a day? Perhaps. The way Jewish law speaks about it is that a woman shouldn't have to serve 2 masters. Now, it's speaking from its time, right? This is about 4th century of the Common Era, right? But the woman shouldn't have to serve 2 masters, both God and her husband, who calls on her to care for her children. So, yes, it releases her, but it also releases her from the spiritual connection of prayer 3 times a day. Now, the traditional Jewish law also speaks about positive reasons that women might not need to fulfill time-bound commandments. Mitzvot aseh zman grama, time-bound commandments. And it says that, and this always tickles me, it says that women are just more naturally tied to time and the natural cycles. Read monthly cycles there. And so we don't need that rhythm of praying 3 times a day. And I just can't help but to share with you the words of one of my mentors and teachers, Rabbi Professor Vanessa Oakes, who teaches at the University of Virginia. And she, in teaching this text in a Jewish feminism course I took, taught, about that we're connected to the cycles of the moon. She said, "My fallopian tubes do not make me more spiritual than men." And so sometimes when Jewish law uses positive language to elevate the reasons that it's opting women out from full activity, the language is lovely, but the reality is the same at the end, and it's limiting. So there are pretty far-reaching consequences in Jewish law for this opting out of women. And this is a human creation, Jewish law, that we now live, though in the Orthodox world they accord those early rabbis and the teachings and the law of those early rabbis with the same status of law from Torah and Hebrew scripture. They say in the Orthodox world they talk about the written Torah and the oral Torah. So that which was written, given on Sinai, and that which was passed down from the mouths of the rabbis. So they give it equal status. And you know who elevated it to that status? The rabbis, right? Okay, so they elevated that really high, right? And though sometimes there is a different level given to Torah-itic law versus rabbinic law, and it's pretty far-reaching consequences from this opting out of women from certain time-bound commandments. Others are given to women, which is a clue that it's not really about time-bound commandments. It's about societal norms. It's about a protection of those that the men wanted, of certain laws and practices they wanted done a certain way, and frankly, a lack of trust in women to have the capacity to carry those out, both in the realities of their lives and perhaps even intellectually at that time, though there are salient examples that go beyond that. The sage Rashi had daughters, and he taught his daughters Torah. They were scholars in their own right. So I brought you texts. I obeyed orders, and I brought you texts, and I think that I'm not going to address them in detail now. One, I brought a text of the prophet Devorah, who was a prophetess and a judge, which is really more like a charismatic spiritual leader and warrior. And she not only sat in judgment over the people, but led them into battle by request of the general Barak. And she agrees, saying, "Very well, I will go with you," when he asks her to lead the Israelites with him into battle. And she says, "However, there will be no glory for you in the course you are taking, because Adonai, God, will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." Watch out, Barak. The woman's going to get credit for this, okay? And the other one I brought you was about the daughters of Zelophehad, who was an Israelite who had passed away, leaving 5 daughters and no sons. And so his property, the share that he would get in the land of Israel, this God-given portion, was going to go outside of his family. And his daughters went to Moses requesting that they could inherit this land, though that was not the law. So this bold stepping out into the public sphere, asking Moses himself a question, and Moses doesn't know the answer. Moses takes it to God, who changes the law so that women, if they had no brothers, when their father passed away, could inherit that God-given portion and pass it to their children, providing that they married within the tribe, so it didn't go out of those ancient tribal holdings. And so from that text, I think a really important thing to learn is that when times change and when our needs change and our understanding of what's best changes, our understanding of what's holy, what's our highest value, sometimes the law needs to change. The custom needs to change. And in the Jewish world, this has to do with ritual innovation, liturgical innovation, including addressing God and not just male God language, but female God language, complicated by Hebrew being a gendered language. But there are beautiful examples. Av harachamim is one way we refer to God. Av is father, and rachamim is compassion. So father of compassion, but rachamim comes from the word rechem, womb. Nurturing female father. These beautiful balance. So it's a process, and we aren't at the end point, but there's a path to enough and a path to not even needing this conversation at all. Thank you. Yeah.
Do we have the cards coming up? Well, we have this awkward delay waiting for the cards. Could you please join me in thanking these 4 wonderful panelists? Just hold your card up, and the greeters, I think is the term, will collect them and bring them up. How long do we have for questions? 35 minutes, okay. I'm going to shuffle them. We'll see how well I can read. Okay, got. All right. Not everyone's? Okay. All right, this is a generic one. In religion, can only one God, and don't shoot the messenger, or his messengers change language, or can humans change law? In religion, can only God or his messengers, and his is written, change a law, or can humans change laws? And that, I guess, is open to anybody.
Well, I will take a stab at that. I assume they mean religious law. In the Baha'i teachings, say that God sends a succession of messengers to humanity to help us to get closer to him and to understand. And each messenger brings new laws, but that does not necessarily mean that everything else is thrown out. It's a succession. It builds on what has happened before. And perhaps let me go back to an analogy, which we use a lot. There are a lot of analogies to help us understand mysteries of God in the Baha'i faith. And Baha'u'llah, who we believe is God's messenger for today, has said that humanity at different stages, and now it's in its adolescence. And so there are different laws that are needed for its adolescent stage. When it was in its elementary stage, there were different laws that were needed. So each manifestation brings social laws, but the spiritual laws never change. That is the teaching of the Baha'i faith, that the spiritual laws never change, but the messengers of God bring different social laws for the particular time, and that those laws are built upon, and those social laws are expanded or give way to new social laws with the new messenger of God.
Anyone else want to chime in?
I can say briefly, in the Islamic tradition, the formation of laws is based on the Holy Quran, which, as I mentioned earlier, is seen as the verbatim word of God. But in addition to that is also the teaching and behavior of the Holy Prophet. And also in addition to that is definitely man-made understanding based on culture, based on what is applicable in the culture, based on analogy, as you mentioned. So one example can be, one of the undergirding principles of Islamic law, Sharia, is the preservation of human life. And so 1,400 years ago, we did not have organ donation. And so there's nothing specific or explicit about organ donation. But today, most religious scholars sort of will extrapolate on that, of this idea that if you save one life, you have saved all of humanity, and say that organ donation is acceptable for Muslims.
I would say that also, I'm sure for any of us it's hard to speak for an entire religion, right? And there's such a range within Judaism, from the ultra-Orthodox all the way to the most progressive Reformed Jews. And I think that there's an interaction with law from Torah, law from the early rabbis, almost like if you picture a tree with kind of, there's a core and then there are rings around it of different understandings of law through the ages, both just in gained understanding and also in encountering new situations such as organ donation or fertility treatments or things of our modern scientific world. And the interpretation is human interpretation, and there are methodologies for that. And in the Orthodox world, those methodologies have to be within a framework of commentary and understanding of the more ancient laws. There has to be some loophole or some precedent or some minority opinion that you can lift up to get there. And I would say that sometimes the more progressive movements of Judaism cut out some of those middlemen and go straight for the value backing. And so it's a human endeavor when we encounter new situations and new understandings. And it also, the degree to which Scripture is unchanged is very much under debate in the Jewish world. My belief is that Torah is holy, and it speaks in human language and is passed down to us through humans. So, and I think that its holiness comes from its deep humanity. But in the Orthodox world, it's given on Sinai from God, Word of God, unchanged. So there's great difference in that spectrum.
Okay. The next question, again, how can humanity use religion as a platform to unite itself? Very simple questions.
Well, I think we can stop using religion as a weapon and as a means to continue to divide ourselves. And we can do what we're doing right now. And we can use it as a way for conversation and use it as a way to say yes first and not no. I may have more, but that's my first. What do you have?
Well, in the Baha'i faith, there's a specific quote in our scripture that says, consort with the followers of all religions. And in fact, at one point in the scriptures, Baha'u'llah says that if religion should be the cause of disunity, there should be no religion. So this whole concept of religion is to bring people together, to help to elevate our understanding and get closer to God. So we should not be debating and having differences about it, but there are many steps to God, and we should not try to use it as a weapon, as you said, and be divisive. That's really one of the exhortations that is specific to us in our teachings.
Sure, I can also add I'm an interfaith educator by day, and what I work with college students around the country is both with people of faith and people who are atheist or secular humanists, is that we all have shared values. For every person in the world, there are some core common values. Even if you disagree with each other 99% of the time, find something that you care about, and that should bring you together. And, I truly believe that once you are able to hook on to that one thing, you'll be able to understand that there are more than 1% that brings us together. But I do believe that there are common values across communities and cultures around the world, and that it is up to us to sort of identify those and break through our own walls to find them.
I think, another important element is for each of us, and to encourage in those we come into contact with, to make sure we're not painting with a broad brush when we talk about any religion. Often the fundamentalist voices are the very loudest, and everything we can do to lift up the multitude of voices within religion, I think does a great deal. I think that I often find that I feel that I have even more in common with progressive wings of any religion than ultra-Orthodox Judaism, in terms of our shared understandings. Not that there's anything wrong with being in the ultra of any religion, but I think that lifting up those multitude of voices, not to wash away our differences, but to celebrate the beauty of that diversity, is a really important thing.
Okay, the next question is quite a little more specific. It's asking, what are the attitudes toward divorce and the rights of women in a divorce? And I guess that's from each of your faith perspectives.
I can speak within Judaism. I would say one way that, in most ways at least, divorce law in Judaism from the get-go, I think has been relatively progressive, that women in a traditional ketubah, in a wedding contract, are given certain rights. It's women, not men, that have a right to sexual relations with their husband. In fact, there's like a minimum that if women want it based on a man's profession, that a man must provide to her if she wants it. Like sailors have to dock twice a year. But if you're a scholar, it's like every day if she wants it. But it's women, not men, who have those rights. It sounds silly, but that's incredible. No man has a right to expect that of a woman. So how progressive is that idea in terms of, think of ancient consent, even in marriage, right? But a woman has a right to food, to shelter, to housing, to basic necessities. And if a man is not meeting that, either a man or a woman can have a contract of divorce written up and receive that and be free to marry others. Now, unfortunately, a man has to agree. A woman has to as well in order to be divorced. But so there is a phenomenon of men not agreeing to divorce, and so women are unable to move forward and marry again. And you see that in the ultra-Orthodox world, unfortunately, a bit. Sometimes it's in the news in Israel, but also here in the United States. And there's a phenomenon called a chained woman, because it keeps her from moving on. And it's a way, unfortunately, that sometimes abusers retain some level of control. But again, that's just like, it's a pretty rare thing, and it's an important thing, but there are Orthodox authorities working on finding loopholes to that law as well. But in general, I think that there's an acknowledgement within Judaism that not sometimes the holiest thing is not to stay in an unhealthy relationship. And there's not an indignity in moving forward.
I think that a lot of that is true in some parts of the Christian tradition. There are certainly some Christians who would find that divorce is absolutely not acceptable, not even an option, not even a part of their worldview. And then they're all the way to sort of a lot what you said just a minute ago, that look at this relationship. Is this about what Christ would say of the wholeness of each person, and is the dignity and the love of God really alive here? And so there's a big spectrum and lots of conversation in the middle.
So similar to Judaism, in Islam, marriage is a contract that is signed by the man and the woman, and that marriage is understood to be something that is accepted and wanted by both parties in that marriage. So, here again is this question of have we come far enough? Because that is the Islamic law understanding of it, but culturally, sometimes that is not the case. Most marriages in the U.S. are, quote unquote, love marriages, people who want to be married to one another. I'm not going to speak for 1.6 billion people, but I'll just speak to my reality and to, the people who I know and the cultures that I'm familiar with. In terms of divorce, again, similar to Jewish law, if the rights are not met by the husband, the woman does have the right to initiate a divorce. And men also obviously have the right to initiate a divorce. Similar to Judaism, sometimes the man does not accept that divorce, and the woman is sort of left hanging, what we say, a hanging woman, ma'allaga. And that means that she's unable to, again, move forward and to remarry. So under Islamic law, women are considered autonomous beings. They should be able to remarry and move on with their lives. Typically, children stay with the mom until a certain age, and then they are expected either to move to the father, or if there's an agreement between the two parties, they remain with the mother to be raised and to live. But the father is always financially in charge of taking care of the children, and by extension, financially in charge of taking care of the mother if the children remain with her. And so here I just want to say a word about Sharia, which is like the scare word often. People are always, some politicians say that Muslims want Sharia in America, and for most American Muslims, Sharia is just this, legislating marriage and divorce. And so, for example, if you have a husband and a wife who want to get divorced and they make the same amount of money, right? Say they both make $100,000. Under Islamic law, if the child remains with the mother, the husband, regardless of how much the woman makes, has to pay her a living kind of wage for her and for the child. So for a lot of men, they don't want Sharia because they just want to say, hey, this lady makes $100,000, I don't need to, get involved, because Sharia here works against them, right? And so for a lot of Muslim women, they believe that under Sharia, their rights are protected. And so here, this is just sort of a small example. Obviously, there are many other examples where Sharia is also abused, as we were talking about in terms of the hanging women, hanging because they're just sort of chilling, they're not able to move on with their lives, and other examples as well.
In the Baha'i faith, divorce is expressly accepted, but it's also highly discouraged. The first, marriage itself is considered a holy and sacred institution, and the parties, before they even marry, are told to know the character of one another and to really come together. No one chooses for them. They choose them. Each chooses his or her own spouse. And they are really taught that their marriage in fact, is considered a fortress for well-being in the Baha'i faith. And if it comes to a period where the parties find that they're unable to be together, then they find that it's difficult, then they enter into what is called a period of a year of waiting. And the purpose for that is really to allow those individuals the opportunity to determine, is it really what they want? Do they really want to divorce? Or is this an opportunity to work on some of the challenges? And many of those challenges have come from outside forces. And so they have that opportunity to consult with one another, to consult with their local spiritual assembly. We don't have clergy in the Baha'i faith. We have institutions known as spiritual assemblies, which have the responsibility for the spiritual well-being of the community. And these are 9 individuals. So those parties have an opportunity to really consult with their local spiritual assemblies to see whether or not during that year of waiting, they may be an opportunity to reconcile. And if after the year has passed and they do not, then they may proceed with the Baha'i divorce. And divorce is open to either party. And it does impose some obligations on, the father in the faith to be responsible for the children, but at the same time, it recognizes the responsibility of the mother to be responsible. But either party has a responsibility, and the father does not have any prior rights to raising the children. That's an equal responsibility in the Baha'i faith.
I think I want to
Sure.
add one piece to this from the Christian perspective that, for some Christians it would be absolutely that this is not even in my worldview. And then for Christians who, and I'm an Episcopalian and we're a sacramentally based faith, Roman Catholics are too. So for those of us that see marriage as a sacrament, and that means an outward and visible sign of the inward and spiritual grace of God, then even though there may be an Episcopalian or Roman Catholic or someone who believes this marriage needs to end, doesn't mean that I don't want to imply that it just means, okay, we think it's okay, and so it's not painful or meaningful, right? It's still, there's an end to a sacrament here, and that would be a loss, even if it was right, because both people needed to grow. And we're not able to do that together. So, and then not being Roman Catholic, but I think since I'm representing them, I need to say that for some Roman Catholics, then for them to remarry, and you probably know this, an annulment would have to happen. So I just wanted to make sure I didn't make it seem as flip as I have before.
I think, Dana, Ms. Dana, you've already answered this one. It's a question about clergy, that female ministry leadership in clergy is relatively, quote, new in Christianity, and I assume in Judaism. That's the question. Has the Baha'i faith always had female clergy? Well, maybe you could talk about the leadership of females and women in the
women
faith.
have, from its inception, women have played a very important role in the Baha'i faith. As I said, we don't have clergy, but there are 9 people in any community where there are 9 or more Baha'is. 9 people will have a local spiritual assembly, and then at the national level, the institution that I serve on, that's the National Spiritual Assembly, comprised of 9 women, and 9 women. Oh my God, no, 9 people. 9 people.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
I see what you did. And these 9 members at the local level are elected by the community. There's no campaigning. They look at these people who have well-trained mind, a knowledge of the faith, who are, very active, loyalty. They look at these qualities and they choose 9 people. And these 9 individuals collectively are responsible for the spiritual well-being of the community, but individually they have no power, no authority at all. So I may serve on a spiritual assembly as an individual, but individually I have no power. It is when the institution comes together as a spiritual assembly, that is who has the power to make decisions with respect to the spiritual well-being of the community. And it is done through consultation. So these 9 members will consult and then, make decisions based on that consultation. That's a very quick answer. It's much more, I could spend more time talking about it, but that's a very quick answer for you.
So I know it wasn't addressed to me, but could
Please,
I share a couple words? So in Sunni Islam, there is no clergy. And so in the United States, when oftentimes interfaith panels don't look like us, they're men, and there's usually an imam, and he is seen as a member of the clergy. And this is, imams throughout the United States and Canada have now taken on that role of playing the role of the clergy. And imam in Arabic just means the prayer leader. And for most understandings of Muslims, in mixed gender spaces, men lead men and women and children. In single gender spaces, women can lead other women in prayer. And so the imam in the Muslim world is not given the same sort of elevation as he is given in the United States or in the West. What is given that sort of elevation are muftis, are legal scholars, and this is in the Sunni world. I'm unfortunately, I don't want to say definitively for the Shia sisters and brothers, but in the Sunni world, women and men can be muftis. They can be legal scholars, and they are. And we have examples of this throughout, not only in the contemporary world, but also throughout the history of Islam.
Okay. The next question is very specific to you, and then the next two are actually very specific to two of you. But everyone, again, it's open. So it says, Ms. Maki, how can you explain that in Islam a man is allowed to marry up to 4 permanent wives and many temporaries, but women are not allowed to do the same? And second, also the Quran says 2 women are equal to 1 man as a witness, etc. So it's asking you to address those two.
Yeah, sure. So I'll take it in a few points. So this question of temporary wives, I just alluded to right now that there's a difference between Sunni and Shia. And under the Sunni tradition, which is 90% of the Muslim world, there is no such thing as a temporary marriage. Marriage is considered half of your religion, half of your faith, and it's not something to be taken lightly, and it's not something that it should be entered with the understanding that it will end at a temporary time. And I know that my Shia counterparts have their own religious understandings of this, and they justify it in their own way, but the vast majority of Muslim scholarship does not accept it. In terms of the multiple wives, I don't want to be flip, but one of my, and I guess I will be flip, but a friend of mine, kind of, and then I'll share a serious answer. But she said, people always ask, why is it that men can have 4 wives, but have you ever seen 4 men that you actually do want to marry? Yeah. So I'm saying this for a couple of reasons. One is that this idea of multiple marriage, plural marriage, is not something that is fully accepted in the Muslim community, not only in the United States, but throughout the Muslim world. So it's A, controversial even within our communities, and B, practiced very rarely, and C, seen as something that is an indulgence at best, really. And so the understanding is that you are allowed to have a plural marriage under specific circumstances, and those circumstances are there was a war and there are a multitude of widows and orphans who need financial support during a time when most women did not work and most young people were fully dependent on the clan or on a patriarch to provide for them. And so there's that specific understanding in the Quran. And the Quran does say you can marry up to 4, and then very quickly it says, but if you fear that you will not treat them equally, then just marry 1. And so earlier when I said that the Quran's undergirding ethic is one of equality, I meant it. There's this really the sense of if you marry someone and you feel like you cannot offer her, or you refuse to offer her all of her divinely given rights, then A, why are you getting married again? And then B, that's actually grounds for divorce from the first wife. And then I believe what was the third?
The second question had to do with, with two men, 2 women being equal to 1 man as witnesses.
Right. So the witnesses thing, earlier I alluded in my presentation around the patriarchy, saying certain things about women and saying, obviously, this shows that they're deficient. For example, their monthly cycles shows that they are weak. In the Quran, it does say that in some matters of adjudication around business matters, that a woman can offer testimony and she can have her friend, a female friend, be there so that she may remind her if she forgets. So I and many other people, many other Muslims extrapolate several things from that. One is women give testimony, this understanding that women are seen as people who are witnesses and that people whose word should be seen by the entire community as an important word, that they as witnesses. The second is that this was specifically, again, the context was in business. And so there was this understanding that is true to that time that women perhaps didn't get so much involved in business. And so if she needs assistance, she can phone a friend. Essentially, and she can have that assistance from her friend. It doesn't mean that women's testimony always is quote-unquote half of men. And the reason I say that is because if you look at adultery under Islamic law and the witness of a wife who says that her husband has committed adultery against her, or a witness of a wife who is, testifying for herself, is seen as a fully equal to the witness and the testimony of her husband or any male person that, and usually it's her husband, but any male that is testifying against her. And so what jurors have said specifically is that it is that the reason that two women were sort of acknowledged at that point was because at that time it is acknowledged that women were not involved in business. Today, you don't really see that around the world, around the Muslim world. Women give testimony, offer testimony all the time, and it doesn't actually make sense, as when I just mentioned, where there are women judges around the world who are Muslim and who are in Sharia courts. How can that truly be if there's this understanding that women's testimony is half of men's?
This one, again, depending on how you interpret it, could go to everyone or only to one. What does the day of resurrection mean to you? I'm looking at you.
That's mine.
Well, go for it.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm trying to think of all Christians here. So for some, it would mean talking about what happens after we die, right? That we go to a place called heaven, and maybe it looks a certain way and has all of our favorite people and food. And I'm not trying to be cute, but I mean there is that sort of sense that the day of resurrection is after we die, what happens to us then? That our souls and bodies live in a new way. And I would say that, and that doesn't have to just happen when we die. And so what I'm about to say, I've sort of learned more from the mystic sort of strand of Christianity, and not just them, but I read a lot of that, and they say all this. So, which is that this sense of having a new life in God, rising to a new way of living, can happen right now, and we don't have to wait. I'm just going to sludge through and just, be good, and that'll be my insurance for heaven later, right? But actually, I can live a new life, a day of resurrected wholeness and completion with God, even now, and everything in between that.
Anyone else?
For Baha'is, you may hear Baha'is talk about something called a New World Order. And, when we talk about a day of resurrection, it is a transformation of our spiritual selves into understanding why we're here and what it is we're supposed to do, and beginning to look at the world and look at others through the essence of who they are, and to interact with people in a different way. So the resurrection is really this transformation, and this transformation The spiritual transformation has its application in the practical ways in which we behave and how we deal with one another, how we develop our communities, how do we have these vibrant communities in which racism, oppression of women, and all forms of prejudices have been eliminated. That to us is a resurrection. It's a new world that is being put before us because we begin to transform ourselves spiritually.
I'll say that though we don't talk in the language of resurrection, I hear a lot of similarity in terms of when in Judaism we talk about the world to come, which either could mean when we die and we go to heaven, though there's not a belief in hell in Judaism. It's more about when we talk about the eternality of the soul. Or there is a belief, not so much in Reform Judaism, but in some other wings of Judaism, in a messianic age that would be heralded by a Messiah. Not who has already come, but who would come and is simply like the announcer. But in Reform Judaism, we often talk about our work now to create as close to we can come to a messianic age, a world that is more whole, more unified, and more complete. And really, when Judaism talks about teachings about the world to come, it isn't about what actually will happen after we die or in a messianic age. It's about us right now and how we should strive to act right now. That it's a time when strife will be eliminated. That isn't that we should hope and pray for it. It's that we should create that right now and live in that way right now and imagine what the world would be if we lived in that way right now. So it isn't about after we die or something in the future. It's about how should we be in this world right now.
Okay.
Yeah, so there is a day of resurrection in Islam, and it is sort of understood to be a time in the future after Christ comes back as the Messiah, and that the world has ended. The world as we know it has ended, and everyone in creation will come about and essentially be judged on their actions in this reality in their time, and then from there go on to heaven, hell, or the place in between, and await their judgment. And again, it's also a reminder for us to think about who we want to be on that day. And so it's constantly this understanding that Muslims are part of this larger humanity and part of this larger understanding that we have a responsibility toward one another as human beings and responsibility toward our own souls as created beings of God. And it's often also used as a reminder for people that there is another world out there, and we might not have the imagination capable right now of imagining it, but that there is a sort of this world unseen as well.
Thank you. I've been told we need to draw this to a close. There was one question. Whoever asked it, I apologize. But you're invited during the after period to just engage any of the speakers you wish to. At this point, we're going to have closing remarks from Dr. Jana Kadim Kodadad. Ma'am.
On behalf of the Interfaith Understanding Committee, I want to express our deepest appreciation to all the participants in this panel, an excellent panel focused on very timely theme, the status of women. Have we come far enough? And what do the sacred texts teach? We are especially thankful to Reverend Hawkinson for the serene setting of Wilmette Covenant Church in this sanctuary, and also to the staff of the Covenant Church for their gracious hospitality. Our thanks also go, of course, to Professor Mokaitis for moderating this panel, to Reverend Andrea Johnson for the opening welcome, to the panelists who have presented the perspective of their faith on the status of women so eloquently and often with great passion, and using supporting selections for their perspective from their sacred texts. The panelists Many thanks to you, Valerie Dano, and Miss Hin Maki, Reverend Heath Howe, and Rabbi Siegel, Emily Siegel. We trust that you have found these presentations and the insights therein thought-provoking, stimulating, and uplifting. By the questions you asked, it is obvious that you did. You did find them uplifting, and your questions, in fact, added much to this session. So we thank you for your presence. Full equality of rights of women and men has been a long-standing challenge in our world. It is a prerequisite to the advancement of human civilization, absolute requirement for the advancement of human civilization. The subtitle, Have We Come Far Enough?, gives us cause to ponder. Though advances have been made, we have not yet come far enough, not even in this progressive Western culture. Advancement of full equality of rights and opportunities between women and men, and recognition of women's contributions in our land of freedom is bound to bear its effects on the status of women in other lands, where brutal repression of women still prevail. We can only imagine the richness of a world culture wherein women's capabilities are tapped, their contributions recognized, and their potential realized. When we reflect on the history of religion, we realize that the great religions of the world, in the great religions of the world, there were pivotal women who were pivotal to the advancement of religion, like Mary Magdalene, Khadijah, Sarah, Tahere, and many others. They have made enduring contributions, both to advance of civilization and to the advance of the great religions of our world. The status of woman takes a level of significance which can extend far beyond this country to all of humankind. I would like to offer a closing prayer from Baha'is sacred text dedicated to all of humanity, after which you're all invited to partake of light refreshment. O thou kind Lord, thou hast created all humanity from the same original parents. Thou hast intended that all belong to the same household. In thy holy presence, they are all thy servants, and all mankind are sheltered beneath thy tabernacle. All have gathered at thy table of bounty and are radiant through the light of thy providence. O God, thou art kind to all, thou hast provided for all, thou dost shelter all, thou dost confer life upon all, thou hast endowed all with talents and faculties. All are submerged in the ocean of thy mercy. O thou kind Lord, unite all. Let the religions agree. Make the nations one, so that they may see each other as one family and the whole earth as one home. May they associate in unity and concord. O God, upraise the standard of the oneness of humankind. O thou kind Father God, exhilarate the hearts through the fragrance of thy love, brighten the eyes through the light of thy guidance, cheer the hearing with the melody of thy word, and shelter us all in the stronghold of thy providence. Thou art the mighty and powerful, thou art the forgiving, and thou art one who overlooketh the shortcomings of humankind.
deserve a round of applause.